407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now,
yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
From the studios of Blackwater Media in the city of Atlanta, it's time for another edition of the Historian's Almanac. I'm your host, Dr. William Lester. On this edition of the program, the conclusion to the Historical Dracula. Throughout his reign, Dracula continued to systematically eradicate the old boyar class of Wallachia. Apparently, Dracula was determined that his own power be on a modern and thoroughly secure footing. In the place of the executed boyars, Dracula promoted new men from among the free peasantry and middle class, men who would be loyal only to their prince. Dracula's atrocities against the people of Wallachia were usually attempts to enforce his own moral code upon his country. He appears to have been particularly concerned with female chastity. Maidens who lost their virginity, adulterous wives, and unchaste widows were all targets of his cruelty. Such women often had their sexual organs cut out or their breasts cut off and were often impaled through the vagina on red-hot stakes. One report tells of the execution of an unfaithful wife. Dracula had the woman's breasts cut off, then she was skinned and impaled in a square in Turgovist, with her skin lying on a nearby table. Dracula also insisted that his people be honest and hard-working. Merchants who cheated their customers were likely to find themselves mounted on a stake beside common thieves. Although Dracula experienced some success in fending off the Turks, his accomplishments were relatively short-lived. He received little support from his titular overlord, Matthias Corvinus, King of Hungary, son of John Hunyadi, and Wallachian resources were too limited to achieve any lasting success against the powerful Turks. The Turks finally succeeded in forcing Dracula to flee to Transylvania in 1462. His first wife committed suicide by leaping from the towers of his own castle into the waters of the Arges River rather than surrender to the Turks. Dracula escaped through a secret passage and fled across the mountains into Transylvania and appealed to Matthias Corvinus for aid. The king immediately had Dracula arrested and imprisoned in the royal tower. There is some debate as to the exact length of Dracula's confinement. The Russian pamphlets indicate that he was a prisoner from 1462 until 1474. However, during this period he was able to gradually win his way back into the graces of Matthias Corvinus, and ultimately met and married a member of the royal family, possibly the sister of Corvinus, and fathered 2 sons. It is unlikely that a prisoner would be allowed to marry a member of the royal family, as the eldest son was about 10 years old at the point that Dracula regained the Wallachian throne in 1476. His release probably occurred around 1466. Another possible reason for Dracula's rehabilitation was that the new successor to the Wallachian throne, his own brother Radu the Handsome, had instituted a very pro-Turkish policy. The Hungarian king may have viewed Dracula as a possible candidate to retake the throne. The fact that Dracula renounced the Orthodox faith and adopted Catholicism was almost surely meant to appease his Hungarian captor. In 1476, Dracula was again ready to make a bid for power. Dracula and Prince Stephen Bathory of Transylvania invaded Wallachia with a mixed contingent of forces. His brother, Radu, had by then already died and was replaced by Basarab the Old, a member of the Dynasty clan. At the approach of Dracula's army, Basarab and his cohorts fled. However, shortly after retaking the throne, Prince Bathory and most of Dracula's forces returned to Transylvania, leaving Dracula in a vulnerable position. Before he was able to gather support, a large Turkish army entered Wallachia. Dracula was forced to march and meet the Turks with less than 4,000 men. Dracula was killed in battle against the Turks near the town of Bucharest in December of 1476. Some reports indicate that he was assassinated by disloyal Wallachian boyars just as he was about to sweep the Turks from the field. Other accounts have him falling in defeat, surrounded by the ranks of his loyal Moldavian bodyguard. Still other reports claim that Dracula, at the moment of victory, was accidentally struck down by one of his own men. The one undisputed fact is that ultimately his body was decapitated by the Turks and his head sent to Constantinople, where the Sultan had it displayed on a stake as proof that the horrible impaler was finally dead. He was reportedly buried at Snagov, an island monastery located near Bucharest. And thus ended the reign of the dreaded Son of the Dragon, and brought to conclusion the horrific legacy of terror spawned by the horror of Dracula. And that concludes another edition of the Historian's Almanac. Thank you for listening to the program. The Historian's Almanac can be heard on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, the American Institute of the Humanities Facebook page, Google+, and the Historian's Almanac Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester reminding you that history comes alive on the Historian's Almanac.